KUED presents the Governor's Monthly News Conference, an exchange between Utah reporters and Governor Gary Herbert. This program was recorded earlier.
Good morning. Good morning. Honored to be with you as always, and let me just pay tribute, if I could, as we start today's news conference, to former Governor Norman Bangerter, our 13th governor, a great leader who took over the responsibility of governor of this state during some very difficult times. Elected in 1984, I'm not sure we all remember that mortgage interest rates, for example, at that time were over 16%. Today it's less than 4%. Prime rate money was costing us 22 to 22.5%. The economy was in a very difficult situation at that time, and when he inherited the opportunity to take over that responsibility as governor. He was a good leader, maybe a great leader, because of his approach at difficult times. You didn't wonder where he stood. He was a no-nonsense, kind of a straightforward, roll-up-your-sleeves and get the job done governor. And it was probably the kind of governor we needed to have during those difficult times. I had the opportunity to meet with Governor Bangerter as a private sector citizen in my own business responsibilities as a real estate broker and developer. Lobbying for private property rights and the small business. And I remember talking to him about what can we do, in fact, to get the economy turned around. He certainly understood the importance of education and did what he needed to do, he thought, to, in fact, improve educational opportunities and help the economy. We also happened to have the opportunity myself to be a leader in the Realtor organization at the time, and we hosted the first debate between Governor Bangerter and Ted Wilson and Merrill Cook in 1988. And to be able to witness that, again, as most of you remember, he was down in the polls by about 30 points. And that was the beginning of his resurgence. And as we all know, he ended up winning that election by just a very small margin. But that was the beginning. I watched that evolution take place as he went out and took his message to the people of Utah and said, I'm the right guy at the right time to continue to lead this state. I've appreciated my relationship with him not only as a private citizen, but then later as a county commissioner, talking about local government issues and where the rubber really meets the road. When I was lieutenant governor, he used to contact me and call me all the time and had suggestions, had questions, and I appreciated those opportunities I had to receive his counsel and talk about issues of the day, as he clearly was observing and participating in what was taking place in the marketplace of politics. And as governor, he's been a good confidant, and I've drawn upon his experience and his wisdom and his counsel in my own responsibilities as governor this past 5.5 years. He was with me just a few weeks ago as he stopped in at the tail end of the legislative session and wanted to talk about what are we going to do if we move the prison with that land that's available there, and counseled me to make sure we don't do anything in haste. There's a long-term opportunity there if we move the prison. We ought to be very methodical and careful about how we, in fact, decide to develop that property. And then as of last Thursday, just a week ago, I had the opportunity to have him at the mansion, and he spoke to our honorary colonels group and many legislators that were there, and again recounted his days as being governor and the challenges he faced and how he tried to address them. He gave us some insight. Talked about the pumps that have been so well noticed, and talked about that was a decision that came in the previous administration as far as the design, something I didn't know about. But he said something that I resonated, and that is, you don't want to blame the previous administration for the problems you inherit today. That was a good principle. He always took on the responsibility himself and did not blame others for the circumstances that he found himself in. I think that's good counsel for all of us in politics. Again, my parting comments that night where I've appreciated our association, Norm. You've been a good friend, a good mentor, and you've given me some great counsel. I want you to feel comfortable in calling me continually as you see issues out there that you want to weigh in on. He promised me he would. So it was with some shock that I got the call this past Tuesday of a man that I have great admiration for, who I thought was very healthy and full of life and the vigor and the wisdom that comes with age and experience, that had had a massive stroke and then passed away. We've lost a great leader here in this state, and we as the people of Utah should show gratitude for his leadership, for his service, and we certainly wish the Bangeter family well, and our condolences in this difficult time for their family. But hopefully they'll be buoyed up in the fact that he was a great governor, a great leader who did a lot of good things for our state and has helped put us on the track where today we see significant positive results. And I attribute a lot of that to the leaders of the past, including Norm Bangeter. He will be missed.
Thank you for that, Governor. In spite of this recent winter storm that we had, Utah is far below its annual precipitation mark. And also given the recent actions of Governor Jerry Brown in California and his attempts to answer their water issues, I'm kind of curious how far you're willing to go to manage our state's water supply.
Well, the good news is we're not quite in the same crisis mode that California is. It doesn't mean we don't have concerns, and we should not be, in fact, very careful in how we conserve the use of our water. We have had a good storm, but it certainly doesn't make up for the lack of snowpack we've had in a very moderate winter. We're probably below 50% of normal throughout most of Utah. And it's not just a matter of ski season and the opportunities to have a good ski industry, but it is because that snow melt becomes the water in our reservoirs, which we hold in part of our sophisticated irrigation system. The good news is, because of a wet summer last year, the drawdown on our reservoirs has not been as acute as it would historically be either. And so today the reservoirs are about the same level as they were a year ago. So that's good news for us. But as we go forward, we have to be very careful and make sure we do our part, all of us, in conserving water. We ought not to be sprinkling our lawns. We ought to do that sparingly and let Mother Nature do as much of it as Mother Nature can. And rather than water every day or every other day, maybe once or twice a week, and make sure we're not wasting water. Just don't set it and forget it. We ought to, in fact, be cognizant if it's raining, don't have your sprinklers on today. That's always a little frustration that we see as people, water when they don't need to water. So conservation is a part of our efforts going forward. Lastly, all parts of our state are not the same. And so the one-size-fits-all is probably not the right approach to take. We have water districts out there that have got leadership, and they will, in fact, tell the recipients and the beneficiaries of their water what is appropriate, what is not appropriate. Our cities, our municipalities that control a lot of the municipal water systems will, in fact, decide whether they should have any kind of rationing that should go on and have people irrigate when and where. So I expect that we will, in fact, work together as a state. I am going to get a brief on this from our water gurus here in the next probably 10 days to see what we're doing and have them brief me on what they are doing to make sure that we do everything we can to conserve water as we go through this summer months. I feel optimistic that we'll be able to be okay, and let's hope that we have a wet summer again. And let's hope that next winter we have adequate snowpack.
Governor, on that note, is it enough to encourage citizens of the state of Utah to conserve, or do we need to take a broader approach and make more mandatory conservation moves?
I think some local municipalities, in fact, will take some mandatory steps. It depends on where they're located in the state and what their water reserves are. So I think there'll be some of that will take place. Certainly a lot of it is awareness. I think people, if they are aware of the facts, will do the right thing without some kind of a stick to club them over the head with. But some of that will be mandatory, but a lot of it needs to be just public awareness and recognize what you can and should do and hopefully take those steps on a voluntary basis.
How do big projects like the Lake Powell Pipeline and the Bear River Dam fit into the long-term strategy as opposed to the short-term strategy?
Well, we've created what we call the Water Advisory Board here in Utah, which we started here a couple of years ago. It dovetails with what we call Your Utah, Your Future. where we want the local communities and people to weigh in on a grassroots basis. You can go to a webpage and you can talk about what you want to see with the growth pressures that we surely are going to have here in Utah as the third or fourth fastest growing state in America. So how we prepare for water is really a critical thing for me. It's becoming an emerging issue in the public. It's always been an issue for me starting a couple of years ago because water is the only limiting factor to growth in Utah. So how we have water, whether it's Lake Powell appropriation, that we have water still in the river, that we at least have on paper, we hope we have it as real H2O, wet water, whether we look at the development of the Bear River Basin and the ability to store more water there and hold it and use it. It's going to be a matter of conserving what we have and also developing what we're going to need going into the future. And that's a significant challenge. We live in an arid climate. You know, it's a desert. Those early Mormon pioneers said, hey, let's make the desert blossom as a rose, and we developed a sophisticated irrigation system. But we still live in a desert climate, and so we need to be very careful in how we utilize water and how we plan for the future. And again, as a fast-growing state, those pressures will continue to be acute. That's why we're taking such a significant time to plan and anticipate the future, so that as our population doubles over the next 50 years, which is what's going to happen, we'll have adequate water supplies to accommodate that growth.
You asked President Obama for help with getting a cap in Utah's Medicaid expansion Healthy Utah issue.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had he said he'd talk to Secretary Burwell. Have you had a chance to talk to Secretary Burwell? Has anybody done any good?
Well, we're all doing good, Rod. We're all working together, and that's really the secret of Utah. I do believe that we have the spirit of cooperation and collaboration in Utah better than most other parts of this country for a lot of reasons. I have talked to Secretary Burwell, Department of Health Secretary. She did acknowledge the contact from the White House regarding my conversation with President Obama, and is anticipating us coming back to visit with her and talking about some possibilities and options as far as how can we in fact cap the costs of health care, whether it be a Healthy Utah approach or some kind of alternative to Medicaid expansion, so that what we buy today we can afford tomorrow. The cost of Medicaid expansion is a concern, and that's an issue that I think is legitimate. We're seeing if we can in fact make sure that there is no uncertainty about the future.
Is there any action going on between you and the Republicans in the House, or your administration of the Republicans in the House, or are you just waiting to see what kind of a deal you can get from Washington?
Oh yes, there's dialogue and discussion going on now as we anticipate this meeting in Washington, D.C. as far as what are the parameters, what would we like to see accomplished, what are the questions that need to be answered. And so we're working very closely with the Senate and the House and the executive branch in anticipation of this meeting. I expect we're going to have a number of meetings as we go forward here and have this discussion and see if we can't, in fact, come together on a solution that is acceptable to the Department of Health in Washington, D.C.
Governor, you've treated those meetings as closed door, as private meetings between yourself, your administration, and the House and Senate leaders. You had announced at the end of the legislative session you're putting together this group. You were basically going to put them in a room and get everybody on board some plan, hopefully Healthy Utah or a variation of that, by I believe July 31st. Why not conduct those meetings in public? Why not let people see the process and perhaps have some input as you go along?
That may be, in fact, the process as we go forward. We're at that stage of the game in the very beginning here where we've got to have the ability to be very frank and open, and what are the questions and concerns, and have discussions that maybe are best held behind closed doors. This is a group that is not subject to the open meeting law, so we're not violating any laws. I recognize the public's need to know and really to help support us to come together, and having the public input and understanding of what we're talking about in discussion I think is important. But as of right now, I think what we're doing now is appropriate. We've got to get the table set, and then we'll see about going forward and probably having opportunities to have more open meetings and get public input. And certainly the public can give input today. They don't have to stop. But we'll provide a forum, maybe create a web page, as well as probably having opportunities for the public to come and hear us discuss these issues in an open setting. That's something I need to work together with the Senate President and with the Speaker of the House. It's not just my decision alone.
A decision is approaching on depleted uranium at Clive. You demanded an environmental assessment. That's been done. Both sides says it supports them. Will you be making this decision, or will this decision be made by the bureaucrats according to the science? Do you know yet what you're going to do?
Well, I don't want to say it in the bureaucrats according to science. I mean, that's kind of a pejorative statement there.
Science is a good word.
Science is a good word, and so science really ought to guide us. And we have an understanding that we have out at Clive the ability to and have permitted Energy Solutions to take Class A waste. That's the law. That's what they're permitted to do. The question is whether depleted uranium is Class A waste. That's the question. I'm sure we have the capability of storing it. We have the capability in this country to storing spent rods. So it's not a matter of can we do it. The question is should we do it, and is it permitted under the law? So I know that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has raised the question as far as whether depleted uranium is in fact Class A waste, and at least they've talked about reviewing and analyzing whether in fact it is. Well, I think that should happen. And frankly, if it's hotter than Class A waste, we don't want to have it. If it's Class A waste, that fits under the parameters of the NRC, then that's something else. They may have the right to permit it. But I want that reviewed, because I have a hunch that it's hotter than Class A waste and should be reclassified as something else. And I expect the NRC to follow up on that and make a decision. And until that happens, I'm not comfortable having depleted uranium stored out at Clive.
So Governor, last Friday, Governor, the federal judge decided not to give a temporary restraining order on SB 54, which you signed over a year ago. And I'm wondering what your advice is to the leaders of the Republican Party, the Central Committee and maybe the Steering Committee, whether they should go forward with this lawsuit or whether you think they should give it up and follow the SB 54, and otherwise you and some other Republicans in 2016 could find yourselves running not under the Republican banner, but just on the ballot without being a Republican.
Well, I'm a Republican, always have been a Republican. I'm a registered Republican. I'm the Republican incumbent governor. I expect that we Republicans will come together and resolve the issue. I've been very consistent about I support and have supported and continue to support the caucus convention system. It's allowed an average guy like me that had little name identification and no money to be able to compete with others who are more famous and certainly more wealthy. That's the beauty of the system. There is probably no perfect system, but the convention, the caucus convention system has really been a very significant grassroots efforts. And as you look at Utah and the outcome we've had over the last, generations, it's produced some pretty good outcomes. I like the outcomes we're seeing in Utah today, and I'm a product of that caucus convention system. That being said, I understand the logical argument, which I think was intellectually correct, that because of the people and the count my vote, that we stood in a position of possibly losing the caucus convention system entirely. And so the wisdom of the legislature in passing a compromise that preserved at least the caucus convention system, and maybe it's like having half a loaf is better than no loaf, certainly I think there was some wisdom there. I'm sorry to see the division this has occurred. I'm sorry to see the infighting within the Republican Party. I think the courts have spoken. There's not an injunction that's been given. It seems to indicate that there is not any constitutional violation, except possibly when it comes to mandating that unaffiliated voters should be allowed to vote in the system. Now, we already have a process where people can go to the election site, and if you're unaffiliated, become a registered voter, vote, and then actually change your registration later. So again, I'm optimistic that we'll come to resolution with this. I expect the leadership and the State Central Committee Party, our congressional delegation, and the governor's office to help weigh in together to resolve this, these differences of opinion. But I'm confident we'll have Republicans on the ballot in 2016.
But your state party chairman, James Evans, said in a declaration to the court that he just doesn't see any way of convincing the party members, the party delegates who have to make that decision finally, to accept the constraints of SB
Yeah.
54. Do you have a message for those folks, for those delegates? They're going to meet in August to decide whether or not to change your party bylaws so you can be on the ballot as a
Well, I expect that
Republican.
discussion will occur in August, and I expect that the executive director of our party, James Evan, will listen to the delegates and listen to them, and I think common sense will prevail. I think they'll have discussions about what we can or can't do, and I expect that will be resolved. So I trust the delegates. I trust the people are be sensible about this issue and say, okay, how do we move forward? And I expect that will be resolved in August.
Will you or have you weighed in on this with the party or with the party chairman? I mean, are you going to use your position as the head of the party, the most visible state office holder, to sort of prod them in that direction?
Undoubtedly, people will ask my opinion, and I will give it, and I expect that will happen in the future as we work together. I'll be working with our congressional delegation, other statewide officers, our legislature, delegates. We'll work it out. I'm confident this will be resolved.
Governor, pretty dismal figures regarding the ability to get people to the polls in Utah. Some discussions given to, like a tax credit or tax incentive to get people to actually exercise this privilege. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's a sad commentary on us as a people if we have to pay you to come and vote. And I would hope that we would understand that we have a great opportunity as Americans, as Utahns, to participate in this civic process and elect our leaders. We have men and women who fought and died for that privilege, and other countries that are envious of our ability, in fact, to select our leaders, government of the people, by the people, and for the people. So it certainly is disappointing we don't have more people participate. But I can tell you, I would rather have people that participate be informed, knowledgeable about the issues and the candidates, and have them vote. If you don't care about the issues and you don't care about the candidates, I'd just soon you not go into the booth and flip a coin and pull a lever. I would just as soon have informed participation. We have countries out there that have nearly 100% participation. They are forced to show up and vote. I'm not sure that's what we want to have here in this country. That being said, I've asked the State Board of Education, for example, to add another half a credit to our sociology programs in schools as part of our graduation requirements to spend time on not only the history of our country and its founding, spend more time on the Constitution so we understand that wonderful document and what it gives to us as Americans we too often take for granted, but also to add a part there on civic responsibility so we can train our young people to understand that they have a great privilege to participate and a responsibility to participate, as simple as just voting. And last but not least on that, I've also asked them to put into a section on free market capitalism, what has made America great, which we're forgetting in this country, about why have we had this elevation of economic opportunity, a rising quality of life, which the very source of is free market capitalism. Yet sometimes we don't even dare say the word capitalism and almost eschew the idea that somebody should have profit in their operations. So those are the things I've added to help encourage the young people, the rising generation, to do better than the current generation when it comes to participation and getting out the vote.
Can I jump back to water real quick? How much of this dry year that we've had do you think is a fluke, just a meteorological anomaly, and how much of it is climate change? And if it's the latter, what should the state do about that?
Well, I believe in climate change. I think the climate does change, and it's been colder, it's been warmer, and we see climate change for a variety of reasons. What we hear from the meteorologists today is this high that's been, parked over Utah, uniquely so this past winter, has been caused by some ocean currents and some other weather patterns that have caused us to have a drought here in the west and extreme weather conditions and snowpack in the east. I mean, they're having record temperatures of cold and precipitation and snowpack where we're having a drought here in the west. The question always has been, how much impact on climate change, used to be called global warming, does man have? That's the science is probably a little bit debatable out there. You hear people on both sides of the argument. For me, it doesn't matter. from the standpoint of we just need to understand, hey, we're not getting as much snowpack. We better prepare for it and do what we can to adjust. And mankind has always adjusted to the weather patterns. We remember the Dust Bowl days, and people in the Midwest and the challenges they faced. Again, we have climate change, and we need to be able to adjust and prepare for it. That being said, too, along with the climate change issue, is we want to make sure we have cleaner air and cleaner water. And so some of our energy consumption and how we do that ought to be at least factored into this issue. And we're making sure that we do things in a more environmentally sensitive way, whether it's extraction industries or our carbon-based fuels. We certainly are embracing more wind power and solar power here in Utah, hydropower, geothermal. So we're kind of approaching it in all of the above here in Utah, and hopefully that will have some beneficial change if it in fact is impacting in any significant way our weather.
Governor, we are out of time. Thank you very much for joining us. The Governor's Monthly News Conference is pre-recorded for broadcast, but you can watch a live stream of it as it is being taped. Please go to KUD.org for more information, and thank you for joining us.
This has been the Governor's Monthly News Conference. An archive of transcripts, video, and audio is available online. Please visit KUED.org. Thanks for joining us.